Ever wondered if the greatest battles happen inside us? Dostoevsky believed they do. Join me as we uncover the dark, profound truths hidden in the human soul. Fyodor Dostoevsky's works are much more than just stories. They are reflections on the very core of what it means to be human. His characters don't just navigate physical worlds, but are enmeshed in deep philosophical struggles that mirror the very concerns of the modern soul. Today we delve into Dostoevsky's intellectual world, not merely through the lens of his plots and characters, but by understanding the deep philosophical questions he explored and how they continue to resonate with us today. These questions of morality, suffering, free will, faith, and redemption were not just abstract ideas for Dostoevsky. They were a matter of survival and a path toward understanding life's ultimate purpose. It's important to recognize that Dostoevsky was not simply a writer. His experiences, particularly his time in a Siberian prison, shaped his thoughts and philosophy in ways that set him apart from his contemporaries. His life was a paradox, a man of faith who wrestled intensely with doubt, a deeply moral figure who created some of literature's most morally conflicted characters. These tensions and contradictions are present in every novel he wrote, and they illuminate his profound engagement with human nature. Dostoevsky lived through profound suffering, physical, psychological, and spiritual. This suffering wasn't something that simply marked his life, it was the lens through which he viewed the world. And through this lens, he crafted his most compelling philosophical ideas. In Dostoevsky's world, suffering wasn't a trivial theme or a passing point. It was the crucible in which human beings forged their most profound wisdom. If we are to understand Dostoevsky's intellectual legacy, we must begin by acknowledging his view of suffering. Suffering is omnipresent in his works, and it takes on a role far beyond the traditional view of hardship. For Dostoevsky, suffering is an inherent part of being human, but it is also a transformative experience. It's through suffering that individuals are confronted with the deepest questions of their existence. We see this theme in his famous novel, Crime and Punishment, where the protagonist, Raskolnikov, commits a heinous crime thinking it will solve his personal and financial problems. Yet the crime does not bring liberation, but instead burdens him with an unbearable weight of guilt and paranoia. This guilt is not just a moral dilemma, it becomes a mechanism of psychological disintegration. Raskolnikov's suffering isn't merely a consequence of his actions, but an existential journey that he must endure to understand the complexity of his freedom, his guilt, and his soul. Through Raskolnikov, Dostoevsky explores how suffering doesn't simply reveal human vulnerability, but exposes the very essence of what it means to be human in a world where good and evil are not clear-cut categories. At the heart of Dostoevsky's exploration of suffering is the idea that suffering, when confronted and endured, leads to growth. In the brothers Karamazov, we see this idea take on an even more spiritual dimension. The characters, each embodying different aspects of human nature, struggle with their own understanding of suffering, guilt, and redemption. This powerful declaration reflects the very heart of Dostoevsky's philosophical concerns. Ivan's rejection of God is not just an intellectual position, but a reflection of his inability to bear witness to human suffering. He is caught in a spiritual crisis, not because he doesn't believe in God's existence, but because the existence of such a God seems morally intolerable to him. In contrast, his brother Alyosha represents a figure of profound faith and innocence, yet he too must grapple with suffering. His faith doesn't shield him from the painful realities of life, but it offers him a way to engage with suffering that leads to spiritual redemption. This juxtaposition between Ivan's intellectual rebellion and Alyosha's spiritual surrender reveals another key aspect of Dostoevsky's philosophy, the tension between reason and faith. Dostoevsky, more than many of his contemporaries, understood the limitations of pure rationalism. In a world where reason and science had increasingly come to dominate, Dostoevsky posed a direct challenge. He saw in human reason both the possibility of great intellectual advancement and the potential for spiritual destruction. For him, the Enlightenment's emphasis on reason was incomplete and even dangerous. It neglected the human soul's need for meaning and connection to the divine. Without a higher moral compass, reason alone led humanity to moral and existential ruin. In his portrayal of Ivan Karamazov, Dostoevsky underscores the dangers of a world ruled solely by human reason. Without faith or a deeper connection to something greater than oneself, reason becomes cold and indifferent, unable to offer the moral or existential guidance needed to navigate the complexities of human life. Yet Dostoevsky's portrayal of faith is not as simplistic as a mere rejection of reason. His characters grapple with faith in deeply complex ways. Alyosha's faith is not blind or naive, but is instead a choice that he makes despite the suffering he witnesses around him. His faith is a struggle, a deliberate commitment to the possibility of divine love and redemption, even in the face of a world filled with cruelty and pain. For Dostoevsky, faith is not a passive state, but an active, existential choice. It is something that must be renewed and reaffirmed in the face of life's most difficult questions. This existential view of faith is tied to his larger philosophical vision of human freedom. Dostoevsky was deeply concerned with the concept of free will and human agency. The notion that human beings have the power to choose, even when faced with the most dire of consequences, is one of the core elements of his philosophy. But free will for Dostoevsky is not a simple or unqualified blessing. Free will, in his view, comes with an immense burden. It is both the source of human dignity and the cause of human suffering. In Notes from Underground, Dostoevsky presents the character of the underground man, who embodies the paradox of human freedom. The underground man is a man of great intellectual capacity, but he is paralyzed by his ability to choose. His freedom becomes a curse, trapping him in a constant state of indecision and self-loathing. This illustrates Dostoevsky's belief that freedom is not merely the ability to act. It is the ability to choose in a world that offers no guarantees or easy answers. True freedom, for Dostoevsky, involves not just making choices, but bearing the consequences of those choices. It involves confronting the inherent uncertainty and suffering that comes with being human. This brings us to one of the most profound and paradoxical elements of Dostoevsky's philosophy, the idea that human freedom can only be fully realized through submission to a higher power, to God. This paradox, at the heart of many of his works, is most clearly articulated in The Brothers Karamazov and Crime and Punishment. The struggle between individual freedom and moral or divine responsibility is what propels many of his characters to the brink of despair. Raskolnikov, for example, believes that by freeing himself from moral constraints, he can transcend ordinary human limitations and achieve greatness. But he quickly discovers that true freedom is not liberation from moral law, but the acceptance of moral responsibility. His journey toward redemption is not just intellectual, but deeply spiritual. It's about understanding that freedom is not the absence of constraints, but the ability to choose within a framework of love, humility, and moral duty. In this sense, Dostoevsky challenges us to rethink our understanding of freedom, not as an unburdened state of autonomy, but as the ability to choose love, to choose faith, and to choose goodness, even when these choices bring suffering. Another central theme in Dostoevsky's work is the exploration of the tension between individualism and community. His characters often grapple with the need to assert their own identity, to find their own voice, while simultaneously recognizing their interconnectedness with others. This tension is embodied in characters like Raskolnikov, who initially sees himself as separate from society, as someone who can transcend conventional morality, and yet ultimately finds that his actions have profound consequences on those around him. Similarly, in The Idiot, Mishkin represents a figure of purity who is unable to fully engage with the world as it is. His disconnection from the darker aspects of human nature leads to both his suffering and the suffering of others around him. Mishkin's journey highlights Dostoevsky's belief that true human flourishing requires both self-awareness and a recognition of our place within a larger community. We cannot exist in isolation. Our freedom and choices are always intertwined with the lives and well-being of others. In this way, Dostoevsky reminds us that individualism, while a necessary component of personal freedom, cannot be pursued at the expense of our moral and social responsibility to others. Throughout his works, Dostoevsky does not offer simple solutions to these complex questions. He does not present a world where suffering can be easily alleviated or where free will can be neatly defined. Instead, he invites us to enter into the contradictions and struggles of human existence, to wrestle with the complexities of faith, freedom, morality, and love. His works are a mirror to our own lives, reflecting our own doubts, fears, and longings. And through this reflection, Dostoevsky asks us not to find easy answers, but to engage in the eternal struggle to understand ourselves, our relationships with others, and our place in the universe. His works continue to challenge and inspire because they refuse to offer easy answers. They demand that we confront the complexities of the human soul, the tensions between reason and faith, freedom and responsibility, good and evil. Through his exploration of suffering, faith, and redemption, Dostoevsky invites us into a world where the questions are as important as the answers, where the struggle itself is what defines our humanity. To understand Dostoevsky's intellectual world, we must move beyond the concepts of freedom, faith, and suffering to the very nature of human psychology and the moral dilemmas that define his characters. His exploration of the human psyche is not just an intellectual exercise, but a deep dive into the soul's struggle with its own contradictions and limitations. Dostoevsky's characters are not merely fictional constructs. They are representations of real human struggles, flaws, and desires. These struggles are not abstract philosophical concepts for him. They are the essence of what it means to be human in a world filled with chaos, injustice, and uncertainty. One of the most striking aspects of Dostoevsky's work is the way he depicts the human mind's capacity for self-deception. His characters often find themselves trapped in a web of lies, not just about the world around them, but about themselves. In Notes from Underground, the Underground Man is a prime example of this self-deception. He is a man of intellect, yet he cannot escape his own contradictions. He despises the very society he wishes to belong to and creates elaborate justifications for his own inaction. The Underground Man's suffering is not just external, it is deeply internal, rooted in his inability to reconcile his desires with his actions. His intellectual prowess only serves to deepen his torment because it allows him to rationalize his behavior, creating a cycle of despair that he cannot escape. This self-deception, according to Dostoevsky, is a central part of the human condition. We often deceive ourselves about our motivations, our desires, and our true nature. And it is only through the painful confrontation with these deceptions that we can begin to understand who we truly are. Dostoevsky's view of human psychology is deeply intertwined with his understanding of morality. For him, morality was not a set of external rules to be followed. It was an internal battle between the higher and lower aspects of the human soul. In Crime and Punishment, Raskolnikov's journey is not merely about the consequences of a murder. It is about his struggle with his own sense of moral superiority. He believes that he is above conventional morality, that his actions can be justified because of the greater good they might bring. However, as the story progresses, he begins to unravel the depths of his own moral decay. His crime forces him to confront not only the suffering he has caused, but also the profound guilt and disillusionment that arise from violating his own moral compass. Raskolnikov's internal conflict is a reflection of Dostoevsky's view that morality is not something that can be externalized or intellectualized. It is something that must be lived and experienced from within, a constant struggle to align our actions with our deepest ethical convictions. What Dostoevsky shows us in his works is that the pursuit of moral purity is fraught with contradictions. Even the most well-meaning individuals, those who seek truth and justice, are not immune to the darker impulses within themselves. This is seen in the character of Prince Mishkin from The Idiot. Mishkin represents an ideal of goodness and innocence, yet his purity becomes his downfall. He is unable to navigate the complex, corrupt world around him, and is destroyed by his inability to reconcile his idealism with the harsh realities of human nature. In Mishkin, Dostoevsky illustrates the danger of naivety, the inability to see the world as it truly is. Mishkin's goodness, though genuine, is unable to overcome the complexities of human existence. This tragic flaw speaks to Dostoevsky's larger view that human goodness is not a simple, unblemished thing. It is instead a fragile, often painful journey, one that requires constant self-examination and a willingness to face the darker aspects of ourselves. One of the central motifs in Dostoevsky's work is the idea of the legendary hero, the person who transcends the ordinary constraints of morality and achieves a kind of greatness. Characters like Raskolnikov and Stavrogin from Demons, also known as the Possessed, believe in their own ability to rise above the laws that govern ordinary people. They see themselves as destined for greatness, capable of changing the world through their own willpower and intellect. But this belief in their superiority often leads to their moral and spiritual ruin. Dostoevsky suggests that the very idea of the exceptional individual, the one who can bend the rules of morality to their own advantage, is dangerous. It leads to isolation, alienation, and ultimately, a loss of meaning. The legendary hero becomes, in many ways, a tragic figure who loses touch with the very human qualities that give life its meaning. This theme of isolation is another recurring element in Dostoevsky's work. Whether it is the underground man, Raskolnikov, or Stavrogin, his characters often find themselves alone, cut off from society, from love, and from any sense of community. This isolation is not just physical, but existential. Dostoevsky was deeply aware of the ways in which modern life can lead to a sense of alienation, where individuals become disconnected not only from others, but also from themselves. This is the existential void that many of his characters face, the feeling of being disconnected from any higher purpose, any meaningful relationship, or any sense of hope. In the modern world, Dostoevsky saw the danger of this kind of alienation, the way it could sap life of its vibrancy and meaning. And yet, even in the depths of this isolation, Dostoevsky suggests that redemption is possible. It is through the recognition of one's own suffering and the acceptance of responsibility for one's actions that one can begin to reconnect with the world and with others. Dostoevsky's view of redemption is not a simple, easy process. It is not about forgiveness without consequences, nor is it about an abstract spiritual salvation. It is about a deep, personal transformation that comes from within. For Dostoevsky, redemption is a spiritual journey that requires humility, the acceptance of suffering, and the willingness to confront the darkest parts of the self. It is a journey that leads, ultimately, to a deeper understanding of what it means to be human in a world filled with suffering, confusion, and moral ambiguity. The characters in Dostoevsky's works do not find redemption through intellectual understanding or rationalization, but through the experience of suffering and the willingness to accept their own moral responsibility. Perhaps one of the most profound aspects of Dostoevsky's philosophy is his exploration of the human relationship with God. For Dostoevsky, the question of God's existence and nature was not simply a theological concern, it was an existential one. His intellectual rebellion is not just an argument against the existence of God, but a profound moral question about the nature of divine justice. For characters like Alyosha, faith is not just a theological concept, it is a living, breathing part of life. It is not something to be intellectually proven, but something to be lived and experienced. Alyosha's journey is one of spiritual growth, of learning to accept the complexities and contradictions of life, while still maintaining a deep belief in the possibility of goodness and love. In his works, Dostoevsky shows that faith is not a static belief, but a dynamic force that must be actively chosen, even in the face of suffering and doubt. In the end, Dostoevsky's philosophy is one of struggle, transformation, and hope. His works remind us that the human experience is not a smooth, linear path, but a jagged, often painful journey. It is a journey that involves wrestling with our own contradictions, our moral dilemmas, our relationships with others, and our relationship with the divine. Through this struggle, Dostoevsky suggests, we can find redemption, not in avoiding suffering, but in facing it with courage, humility, and faith. In this way, Dostoevsky's intellectual legacy is not just a series of philosophical ideas, but a profound invitation to engage with the most difficult questions of life, and to find meaning and hope even in the darkest moments.